The corporatist state and global media war against free speech is in full swing. How do I know? Take a guess. Hello there, you awakening wonders. Thanks for joining me on this voyage to truth and freedom. If you're watching this anywhere other than Rumble, please join me on Rumble and consider supporting our channel, because it has become rather apparent to me that there are persecutory forces at work, and we need to ensure that we can remain connected to you no matter what. Today, of course, we're talking about events of the last week, but in particular, the collusion between big tech and government, and an apparent concerted effort by legacy media and now the state and big tech to silence independent media voices. Obviously, it's difficult for me to be entirely objective given the events of the last week, but that is what we must try to do, and thankfully we have some incredible reporting from the Grey Zone and elsewhere, as well as being able to introduce you to the concept of the Trusted News Initiative. This is a long-standing agreement between global legacy media organizations to cooperate with one another, to corroborate one another, in order to shut down what they believe to be their true enemy, independent media voices. What do they mean by that? Do you think this is simply about business? Do you think that this is about clicks and revenue? Or do you think that there is something bigger at stake? Something of incredible ideological significance? What do you think is the relationship between the media and the state? Do you think, looking back at the last couple of years, in particular the pandemic and the current war, that there has been support from the media when it comes to government policy and a lack of accountability and questioning when it comes to very important and significant questions? Do you think that the legacy media has been investigating the causes of this war, the origins of this war, with the kind of vigour that you might have seen elsewhere? Do you think that the legacy media has been investigating Big Pharma, the imperatives, incentives, financial undergirding of Big Pharma in the way that they have investigated other matters? Let me know in the chat, let me know in the comments, because it seems to me more important now than ever before that we have to analyse, review and understand exactly what's happening literally on a global scale between the mainstream media, the state and big tech. Let's get into it. The author of letters to social media companies demanding the financial punishment of Russell Brand is a British lawmaker implicated in London's war on COVID-19 and Ukraine dissenters. Her husband was a commander in the Army's PSYOPs division. The Grey Zone can now reveal that YouTube's financial censorship of Russell Brand is the result of an effort waged by a former British government minister who was responsible for London's crackdown on dissent during the COVID-19 pandemic. Her husband has also participated in that campaign of state repression as deputy commander of the 77th Brigade, the British Army's psychological warfare division. New developments suggest YouTube's censorship of Brand was driven by direct British government decree. On September the 19th, the social media companies TikTok and Rumble received a pair of almost identical letters dispatched from Caroline Dinenage, the head of the UK Parliament's Culture, Media and Sports Committee. Dinenage informed the companies she was concerned that Brand may be able to profit from his content published on both platforms. She then suggested they impose financial penalties. In a sense, the bypass of judicial process, right to punitive measures, financial ones, seems like an interesting stance for a government minister to be suggesting to a big tech platform. The committee's letter to Rumble contained a direct demand for demonetisation. We would like to know whether Rumble intends to join YouTube in suspending Mr. Brand's ability to earn money on the platform. In a withering response to Dinenage's letter, Rumble CEO Chris Pavlovski asserted that Rumble emphatically rejects the UK Parliament's demands. This is, of course, why we are fortunate to be on Rumble. Please join us there. Please consider supporting us so that we can continue with our organisation. I'm beginning to think that our organisation is having an impact due to recent events. The CEO continued, "We regard it as deeply inappropriate and dangerous that the UK Parliament would attempt to control who is allowed to speak on our platform or earn a living from doing so." Caroline Dinenage served as the UK government's Digital and Culture Minister from February 2020 to September 2021, making her de facto chief of the Department for Culture, Media and Sports, DCMS. In this capacity, she was personally responsible for overseeing construction of the repressive World Economic Forum endorsed Online Safety Bill, which has has been criticised by rights groups for threatening the rights to free expression and privacy. For her leading role in crafting the bill, Dinenage was honoured by the Princess Royal with the title of Dame Commander of the British Empire. Moreover, during this period, the DCMS was home to the shadowy intelligence official-run Counter-Disinformation Unit, which policed COVID-19 disinformation narratives online. Investigations by the civil liberties organisation Big Brother Watch has revealed that instead of suppressing content that posed risks to public health, the CDU was preoccupied with censoring and deplatforming reasonable online criticisms of the British government's COVID-19 response, including opposition to lockdowns and vaccine passports. What we appear to be looking at here are a set of collaborating institutions that have an agenda and then pursue that agenda, even when in pursuing it they have to bypass, repress, obstruct or absolutely ignore existing judicial or regulatory bodies and protocols by moving straight to punitive measures, by bypassing judicial systems, and in particular in the event of COVID, of course, repressing true information, preventing healthy online debate. It's plain that there were narratives that were repressed during the COVID pandemic. It's plain during the ongoing Ukraine-Russia conflict that, well, for example, Russia Today are not allowed to be on most social media sites. Rumble continue to host Russia Today so that people are able to discern from themselves propaganda from truth. This, I feel, is an important component in any democracy. Let me know if you agree in the chat. According to an official fact sheet, the CDU's focus turned to the Ukraine war in 2022. Doesn't it seem odd to you that you can move from a health pandemic to a war? Aren't they quite distinct, compartmentalized issues? Doesn't it seem, therefore, that the real issue is not the subject themselves, a pandemic and how to handle that sensibly, or a war and how to handle that judiciously and correctly, but dissent itself? The ability to oppose existing narratives, the ability to begin to organise communities against establishment narratives and preferred systemic outcomes is being closed down, I would suggest, on the basis of this, rather aggressively. Let me know what you think. Dinenage's husband, Mark Lancaster, helped lead London's blitz on pandemic dissent as Deputy Commander of the British Army's 77th Brigade between June 2018 and July 2022. Specialised in behaviour and attitudinal change, which in itself seems like a strange military unit. What are we going to do about behaviour and attitudes? Mind your own business and focus on just wars? There aren't any. The 77th Brigade maintains a vast militia of real, fake and automated social media accounts to disseminate and amplify pro-state messaging and discredit domestic and foreign enemies. During the pandemic, the 77th Brigade targeted people within Britain and across the West with advanced psychological manipulation strategies honed on battlefields against enemy militaries. It seems that, in the absence of an external enemy, the domestic population becomes the enemy, and any ability to organise and communicate with the domestic population in order that they act on behalf of their own interests has to be silenced and shut down using whatever techniques are necessary and possible. It's only a short while since the pandemic ended, and who knows, maybe the pandemic will begin again. But we now know that at the beginning of the pandemic, theories and ideas were being discussed at the very highest level that were dismissed publicly. We now know that experts with legitimate voices, valid views, clinical trials, significant information were silenced, not because of your safety or my safety, but precisely because it was necessary to control them. Once these institutions exist, it becomes apparent that they can be deployed not only with a pandemic or a war, but potentially with anything that poses a threat to existing narratives. The online profile of a 77th Brigade veteran notes that they were deployed straight from a tour of the Middle East, where they successfully implemented behavioural change strategies against ISIS to countering disinformation and misinformation during the COVID-19 crisis. Doesn't it seem odd that ISIS and the COVID-19 crisis were handled by the same unit, were treated in the same way, when ISIS were the most overt, explicit, amplified enemy and threat that the world had ever faced at that time? And doesn't it seem to you as well a coincidence worth noting that at the commencement of the COVID-19 pandemic, the problem of ISIS just appeared to disintegrate entirely? I'm not suggesting any conspiratorial reason for this. I'm sure there are military, strategic, geopolitical, ideological and philosophical reasons for this. But the very fact that the same unit that was used to confront and counter ISIS is used to confront and counter you strikes me as worthy of consideration and contemplation. Let me know what you think. However, in January, an ex-brigade whistleblower revealed how the Ministry of Defence and RRU routinely circumvented British law to advance the government's crusade against pandemic dissent. It appears there are financial ties between Google and the person that wrote that letter. It's worth noting too that Google is a competitor to Rumble, a significant competitor, a near monopolist. How do media organizations cooperate with one another when it comes to presenting a news narrative? You will remember perhaps in particular the Joe Rogan horse medicine moment. You will recall how you saw a spate of comparable headlines from around the world using the same wording. You will perhaps recall that you never once heard, hold on a second, this is a Nobel Prize winning medicine, the inventor of which literally has a statue outside of medical organizations. A revered and significant medicine was simultaneously referred to as horse paste around the world. How does something like that happen? How does the media operate in coordination and lockstep to present a narrative that appears to be impenetrable, so immersive and absolute that it simply must be true? Well, apparently there's an organization called the Trusted News Initiative. We've said many times on our channel that when you have a word like trusted in the name of an organization, it's worth questioning whether or not you can trust them. Let's find out what the Trusted News Initiative is. In short, I can tell you that it's a collaboration between legacy media and big tech sites in order to prevent independent media voices communicating. How effective could that be? Is it possible to shut down independent media? What strategies would be deployed? How would they work together? Surely the BBC and CNN and the New York Times and various other organizations, online ones like Facebook, would have a vested interest in competing with one another. Is that true? Let's find out. In January, the chairman of the Children's Health Defense, Robert Kennedy, and other plaintiffs filed a lawsuit against the Trusted News Initiative alleging antitrust and First Amendment violations. Trusted News Initiative, launched in March 2020, is a coalition of some of the world's largest news organizations, including the Associated Press, the BBC, the Washington Post, and Reuters, who partnered with big tech with the aim of stopping the spread of misinformation. It's just a couple of weeks to stop the spread. Kennedy, CHD, and several other organizations, journalists, and individuals filed a lawsuit that these legacy news organizations partnered with big tech to collectively censor online news about COVID-19 and the 2020 presidential election that did not align with the official narratives. The result was a significant loss in visibility and revenue. It appears that apparently independent, or at least separate, news organizations are collaborating, and I hesitate to use this word, conspiring to control global news narratives in some of the most important stories in the world. Why? Well, let's explain to you that their intention, it appears, and this is explicit, and we have a quote that undergirds this claim, the explicit intention is to shut down independent media voices. The lawsuit notes that there are two categories of TNI members: legacy news organizations and big tech platforms. You will remember that there was a time where on certain platforms, for example YouTube, where we are now significantly demonetized, you used to have the sense that independent news organizations could flourish, could burgeon, could come up, could establish an audience precisely because they would report in a different way to the mainstream news media. Over time, it's become clear that whether it's on the left or the right, when it comes to significant issues, mainstream media and legacy media organizations report in the same way. I'm talking, for example, about the pandemic or about war, important defining issues. Initially, there was a point where online platforms housed independent media in a favorable way, but something appeared to change. It appears that big tech platforms and legacy media started to operate in alignment with one another. Well, why would that be? And is there any paper trail for how that happened and why that would happen? The TNI exists to, in its own words, choke off and stamp out online news reporting that the Trusted News Initiative or any of its members peremptorily deems misinformation, the lawsuit states. Choke off and stamp out independent news voices. Let me know what you think in the comments. TNI members have targeted and suppressed completely accurate online reporting by non-mainstream news publishers concerning both COVID-19 on matters including treatments, immunity, lab leak, vax injury, and lockdowns and lockdown mandates, and US elections, such as the Hunter Biden laptop story. It adds, by their own admission, members of the TNI have agreed to work together and have in fact worked together to exclude from the world's dominant internet platforms rival news publishers who engage in reporting that challenges and competes with TNI members, reporting on certain issues relating to COVID-19 and US politics. My objectivity has been strongly challenged over recent weeks, but I recognise that I am an insignificant individual in the scheme scheme of things. What is incredibly important is independent media. What is incredibly important is the ability to hold the establishment to account. What is incredibly important is that you have independent media that doesn't just accept government narratives, but investigates, challenges mainstream legacy media narratives and government narratives. For example, a group like the Grey Zone. It doesn't even matter where politically they might lie, on the left or the right. This is becoming increasingly irrelevant because what we are seeing is the rise of centralization and authoritarianism, a desire to censor, to surveil, to control, to shut down dissent, and to deprive people of the option of meaningful political alternatives. What we are being given is a homogenized media space that literally has an accord to agree with one another and to defy, shut down, oppress, choke out, stamp on independent media voices. Why is that? Well, one might imagine is because they are in absolute alignment with centralist state and globalist elite dictates, and they simply don't want opposing voices out there. Because if there are opposing voices out there, then we have an alternative. We have an alternative view. We have the ability to oppose their agenda. Once independent voices are stamped out, then all you have are legacy media outlets who already agree with one another and already agree with the corporatist state. That means there will be no opposition. There will be no dissent. While the Trusted News Initiative publicly purports to be a self-appointed truth police, and that's not really the way to appoint police, is it? Who should be the police? Me? Extirpating online misinformation, in fact, it has suppressed wholly accurate and legitimate reporting in furtherance of the economic self-interest of its members. Economic self-interest of its members. Closing down truthful conversation, legitimate data in order to pursue economic interests. I believe it goes beyond even economic interests. I believe this is about ideology and the ability to oppose ideology. I believe this is about freedom. I believe this is about real democracy. Because for there to be real democracy, there has to be dissent. There has to be open communication. There has to be the ability to challenge mainstream media narratives. You can't have a media that is in lockstep with itself, immersively attacking on subjects like the war, COVID-19 and how to handle it, and a host of other issues. Here we have the evidence that the mainstream media is working together to support a state agenda. Do you agree? Let me know. To support the allegation, the lawsuit cites several public statements made by TNI members. In March 2020, then senior news controller at BBC News, Jamie Angus, explained TNI's strategy to beat disinformation. Now remember, we've said for a long time, disinformation is an extraordinary new term. Disinformation, misinformation, malinformation. What is meant? Often it's information that is at odds with the agenda of the powerful. So here's that quote. Because actually the real rivalry now is not between, for example, the BBC and CNN globally. It's actually between all trusted news providers, trusted means members of this cartel, trusted news providers, and a tidal wave of unchecked reporting, uncensored reporting, that's being piped out mainly through digital platforms, independent media like this. That's the real competition now in the digital media world. Of course, organizations will always compete against one another for audiences, but the existential threat, I think, is that overall breakdown in trust, so that trusted news organizations lose in the long term if audiences just abandon the idea of a relationship of trust with news organizations. To watch the rest of this video, please click the link in your description. It's absolutely vital now that you join us on Rumble. If you can support our channel, please do. It's become evident that this is a real necessity more than ever before. Join us over there, and if you can, please stay free.